So hello, everybody. Thank you for being here and for, I just love this community. I'm so grateful to be part of it and to have the opportunity to speak here. So here we are. Let me just minimize some of these things so I can see my own screen a little better. So today I would like to talk about what is happening in the United States of America. I have titled this the Perfect Storm of 2017 because I believe to a great degree that we are in a perfect storm and that most of us or a lot of us are kind of like we're feeling at sea. We'll talk about Neptune and Pisces and all that fun stuff, but I think that there's an overwhelming energy that is just in the air of this country from just so many directions, and I'm hoping that I can sort it all out for everybody today and enable us all to kind of see our way through the storm and to, actually find the meaning of it, because it's when we find the meaning, we can survive anything. So I've entitled this, referred to it as a crisis in consciousness. And here's a great quote from Jiddu Krishnamurti. And he says that a crisis that cannot anymore accept the old norms, the old patterns, the ancient traditions, a particular way of life, though man has cultivated the external world and has more or less mastered it, inwardly he is still as he was. The great deal of animal still in him is still brutal, violent, aggressive, acquisitive, and competitive. And he has built a society along these lines. And I think that this just so outlines not only what's going on, what I'm going to talk about today, but the energies and the different principles and behaviors that we are dealing with as we move through these times. Carl Jung said, what is the great dream? He said it consists of many small dreams and the many acts of humility and submission to their hints. It is the future and the picture of the new world, which we do not yet understand. When I first read this, it kind of gave me chills. It brought me back to the work of Eckhart Tolle and the New Earth. And though we're not going to really get into that with any depth today, I think that really is important to understand that there is a vision that is alive and well in spite of all of the turmoil and the tumult and the trauma, the three T's, if you would, that we are all having to witness. I think some of us understand where it's all going, but the question that we all ask is, why is it? Why do we have to experience it as well? But here we are. And I think that this photo is just so beautiful because it really shows the family, the life that we hope to have of peace and prosperity and abundance and joy and truly life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you all will remember, high school and junior high school, middle school, some of the best days were the days where we kind of had a movie. So I've got a short video here that I'd like to play. This is from, I believe it was 1981, from a movie called My Dinner with Andre. And it's just a few minutes long, but I'd like to play it out because it says a lot. And when I heard it, it was such a mirror to what all the things that I've been thinking. Clearly, something from over 30 years ago, and I think that there are some alterations as to how we might view it today. But whoops, sorry. But I think it is very, very relevant. If I can just get there we go.
Lying in the bathtub all day, just playing with their plastic duck, and now they're just thinking, well, what can I do? Okay, yes, we're bored. We're all bored now. But has it ever occurred to you, Wally, that the process that creates this boredom that we see in the world now may very well be a self-perpetuating, unconscious form of brainwashing created by a world totalitarian government based on money, and that all of this is much more dangerous than one thinks? And it's not just a question of individual survival, Wally, but that somebody who's bored is asleep, and somebody who's asleep will not say no? See, I keep meeting these people. I mean, just a few days ago, I met this man whom I greatly admire. He's a Swedish physicist, Gustav Bjornstrand, and he told me that he no longer watches television, he doesn't read newspapers, and he doesn't read magazines. He's completely cut them out of his life because he really does feel that we're living in some kind of Orwellian nightmare now, and that everything that you hear now contributes to turning you into a robot. And when I was at Findhorn, I met this extraordinary English tree expert who had devoted his life to saving trees. Just got back from Washington, lobbying to save the redwoods. He's 84 years old. He always travels with a backpack because he never knows where he's going to be tomorrow. And when I met him at Findhorn, he said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "New York." He said, New York. Yes, that's a very interesting place. Do you know a lot of New Yorkers with you talking about the fact that they want to leave but never do?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Why do you think they don't leave?" I gave him different banal theories. He said, "Oh, I don't think it's that way at all." He said, "I think that New York is the new model for the new concentration camp, where the camp has been built by the inmates themselves, and the inmates are the guards, and they have this pride in this thing they've built. They've built their own prison, and so they exist in a state of schizophrenia, where they are both guards and prisoners, and as a result, they no longer have, having been lobotomized, the capacity to leave the prison they've made, or to even see it as a prison." And then he went into his pocket and he took out a seed for a tree and he said, "This is a pine tree." He put it in my hand and he said, "Escape before it's too late." See, actually, for 2 or 3 years now, Chiquita and I have had this very unpleasant feeling that we really should get out. And we really feel like Jews in Germany in the late 30s. Get out of here. Of course, the problem is where to go, because it seems quite obvious that the whole world is going in the same direction. See, I think it's quite possible that the 1960s represented the last burst of the human being before he was extinguished, and that this is the beginning of the rest of the future now, that from now on there'll simply be all these robots walking around, feeling nothing, thinking nothing, and there'll be nobody left almost to remind them that there once was a species called a human being, with feelings and thoughts, and that history and memory are right now being erased, and soon nobody will really remember that life existed on the planet. Now, of course, Bjornstrand feels that there's really almost no hope, and that we're probably going back to a very savage, lawless, terrifying period. Findhorn people see it a little differently. They're feeling that there'll be these pockets of light springing up in different parts of the world, and that these will be, in a way, invisible planets on this planet, and that as we, or the world, grow colder, we can take invisible space journeys to these different planets, refuel for what it is we need to do on the planet itself, and come back. And it's their feeling that there have to be centers now where people can come and reconstruct a new future for the world. And when I was talking to Gustav Bjornstrand, he was saying that actually these centers are growing up everywhere now. And that what they're trying to do, which is what Findhorn was trying to do, and in a way, what I was trying to do. I mean, these things can't be given names, but in a way, these are all attempts at creating a new kind of school or a new kind of monastery. And Bjornstrand talks about the concept of reserves, islands of safety, where history can be remembered and the human being can continue to function in order to maintain the species through a dark age. In other words, we're talking about an underground, which did exist in a different way during the Dark Ages among the mystical orders of the church. And the purpose of this underground is to find out how to preserve the light, life, the culture, how to keep things living. You see, I keep thinking that what we need is a new language, a language of the heart, languages in the Polish forest where language wasn't needed. Some kind of language between people that is a new kind of poetry. That's the poetry of the dancing bee that tells us where the honey is. And I think that in order to create that language, you're going to have to learn how you can go through a looking glass into another kind of perception where you have that sense of being united to all things, and suddenly you understand everything.
So is there anybody here who does not resonate with this? I mean, that's my whole talk right there. I can stop right here because you've got the message. Um, but it's so prophetic. This was all those years ago, and it just really laid out a reality that very few people really were ready to accept in those days. And I think that to a great degree, there's a lot of people on the planet who still aren't understanding or accepting what's going on. So, what I'm going to try and do today, to the best of my ability, is look at the chart of the United States. I use the Gemini rising chart, which is the chart that I learned to use from Jeff Green. And I found that it actually is quite accurate. And look at the transits to it, the progressions to it. Um, I'm going to say up front, if you're expecting to hear about Mr. So-and-so in Washington, I deliberately excluded him from this conversation because I don't think it's about him. I think that he's just part of the experience that we're having for whatever reason. And I don't want to make it about him, or I really don't want to make him important because I don't think that he is. I think he's only important in the terms of the experience that we're all having, but I'm probably getting ahead of the story. So, when we look at a chart, we have to look at, what has come before. And when we look at an individual, we look at where this individual has been and what the context of perhaps of their childhood is in order to understand how they have their behavior and their personality has developed, and the circumstances and relationships that they have encountered have manifested over time. So I want to do the same thing with our country's chart. And so, what are the real roots of American culture? Where did we come from? What were the philosophies that are the settlers and our predecessors and even the generations that came later? My grandparents came in the late 19th century. They certainly weren't, on the Mayflower, but each of us has a generational history that we have brought with us, and that in that generational history is contained centuries, if you would, of philosophy and beliefs. And we're going to explore that a little bit here as we get started. And then we ask, what are the lessons that we're learning as a country? What is the thread of experience? Where is it leading? Is this just some random, series of events that have occurred over time, or is there a thread that is woven through it that is leading somewhere? And perhaps we can try and understand the tapestry that thread is weaving, and again, to find the meaning here, because we need to have meaning. We need to know what the meaning is. As I said, how are we going to weather this? There was a famous Jungian psychologist, Viktor Frankl, and he tells a very interesting story. He spent several years in the concentration camps during World War II. He was German, a German Jew. And he observed all the other men that were in the camp with him, and he noticed that many of them, were not surviving. They were not going to make it through. And he came to the realization that they had not found any meaning. When he was on one of the forced marches that they put him on, when he had sores on his feet and maybe hadn't eaten, any real food for months, and maybe hadn't eaten anything all day, and it was cold and frostbite, and experiencing the total degradation of being a human being, he saw himself in the future standing in front of people talking about his experiences in the camp. And that meaning that he derived from those experiences allowed him to survive. I think that perhaps, I don't want to say that our experience is quite as drastic or as harsh as Viktor Frankl's, but we can learn the same lesson from him, that to understand what is the meaning of these experiences and these traumas that we are being forced to endure, and what are they about. So who are we as a nation and as a people? What is our ancestral heritage? What have the philosophies and ideas that we have brought with us? What do they look like? Because they not only color what happened 250 years ago, but they have affected everything that we're really experiencing today. They have really never gone away. They've just kind of morphed, if you would. And I would, hazard, to say without, becoming egocentric about my country, I think our role as, as a world leader since the end of World War II has also expanded those philosophies, around the world. So it's not something that's just happening here. It's happening globally. And what are the roots, and what is it that we really are facing? Where did it come from? Um, has freedom and equality has been the American dream, but has it always been part of our history, or has it been a moving target? Did we ever really have freedom and equality? We like to tell ourselves, we have a narrative that yes, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. But is that a lie that maybe we've been telling ourselves? And, I hope that everybody will forgive me if, I kind of move into the shadow, but I think we have to understand the shadow. I think we have to understand the darker side of the American culture in order to really get to the heart of what we are all going through, and how this is affecting each of us, even those of us who are not in this country. Excuse me, just take a drink of water. Have we really shared our resources? Have we shared the land? Have we shared what grows on the land? Have we shared the opportunities that exist within this country? Or has it been something that's been reserved to, to the elite, to just a few? Again, we like to tell ourselves that there's equal opportunities for everyone, but I think if we were to look back, in history over time, we'd find that maybe this was not true. And is our sense of equality, really a sense of feeling more equal? I'm more equal than you are. There's an elitism which pervades the American ethic, if you would, that, if you have money and status and family and land and whatever, that somehow you're better than, somebody else. And again, I don't know that this is just an American experience. I think that it's kind of true globally, that, we are a materialistic society, a materialistic world, the Western world at least. And so, that material abundance, which, to many people is so elusive, is always somehow just a little bit out of reach, is the measure of equality. And yet, that's really not what makes us equal. Has this country always been a level playing field, or has it just been an elite club for the offspring of European landowners? And again, maybe that's a harsh statement, but I feel that that's really true. If you've met anybody who belonged to the DAR, the Daughters of American Revolution, they firmly believe that they are an upper class. That there's something about them that makes them better because they can trace their roots back to the colonial times. And so again, this is one of the ethics and philosophies that just pervades our culture. And we have to ask ourselves, were we ever really a democracy? Were we ever really one man, one vote? And I'm going to strongly maintain that we were not. Our founding fathers, for better or for worse, built all kinds of, besides the balances that were built into the Constitution, they also set up, an electoral college, which really has never allowed a one man, one vote. It really has left the selection of our elected officials to a small elite group who have determined, who those choices will be. I have been voting in national elections since the 1960s, and only once or twice have I, really felt that there was a candidate who reflected my views. I've always held this feeling that I had to choose from who they chose. I never got to choose who I really wanted, and I've always felt that that's been an issue. So we're going to look at our national conditioning. What are the conditions that were originally in place when this country was founded? Famous painting of pilgrims, English settlers landing on Plymouth Rock in 1642. It happens where I live in Santa Fe. There were Anglos living here earlier than that date. This city is actually older than 1642. There was an American culture here before then. But you know, again, our common belief in the story we tell ourselves is that this was the beginning of America, but it was really not. There were cultures where I'm sitting today. They go back millennia. Um, but that's a topic for another whole discussion. There were three basic philosophies that were brought in by the original settlers. The first was Puritanism. And this is, you know, again, it's a rather graphic indication, but this is a fairly accurate description of what Puritan life was like. I mean, you did what you were told, or you paid the consequences. It was about a righteousness and sovereignty to God. But who decided what that God was, and who decided what was righteous and what that sovereignty would be? And there was this belief that God directed all things by exercise of his will. So, you know, so we're seeing that there's a heavy religious overtone, that it was about a certain religious belief that really determined the ethics of the society, of what was right and wrong, and what was allowed and not allowed, and what was lawful and unlawful. They held the belief that human beings were depraved sinners, that somehow we had been cast out of the Garden of Eden, and that we were, actually deserved fire and brimstone, that, that this was our lot in life, and this was the normal way to perceive human existence. And their belief structure provided for God choosing who was worthy for salvation. Again, there's this external, concept of who really is, where is source? Is source in, someone's, religious agenda, or a source within each one of us, and it allows us the right to choose, what we think is right or wrong. All human beings were pledged by the covenant. They had to agree to a covenant to be part of the community. It's almost as if, when you join a company, they give you a non-disclosure statement, and you have to sign it. If you don't sign it, you don't have a job. And they were justly condemned, justly in their eyes, for any failure to adhere to that covenant to which they had been actually forced to agree to. It was an unspoken coercion, threat of fire and brimstone. The other culture, which actually is part of this world that I live in here in the Southwest, were the conquistadors, who came from Spain. And conquistador means conqueror. They were professional soldiers. They were soldiers of fortune, if you would. They were like Blackwater, in the Middle East. And again, there was a heavy religious, context to their belief, because they were all sent here, as part of the extension of the Roman Catholic Church. Inherently, they were drawn here. Their motivation was they were looking for the gold that they had heard was in the indigenous cultures here, the cities of gold of the Aztecs and the Mayans and El Dorado. They were drawn here for wealth. They were drawn here for personal wealth and personal aggrandizement. And it was a religious mission as well. They with the conquistadors came the priests, and as they went from tribe to tribe, from pueblo to pueblo, their intention was to convert everybody to Christianity. They had no regard or respect for the indigenous spiritual beliefs or practices that were here. They believed that they were pagans. They were, just subhuman people. And they were professional warriors, and they were using European tactics. And the indigenous people who they encountered had bows and arrows and spears and knives, versus a cavalry with firearms and horses. I mean, it was no contest. It was clearly genocide, and the genocide was facilitated by the disease that they brought, and it was actually the disease that caused more death and more trauma to the indigenous people than the firearms and the horses. They brought smallpox, chickenpox, diphtheria, typhus, influenza, measles, malaria, and yellow fever. They literally decimated decimated the population. Um, there was a story, and I'm trying to remember all the details of it, but there was a Native American who was from in the northeast of New England, and the tribe actually was the dominant race, the dominant ethnicity for many miles around. And he had the opportunity for whatever to sail back to England on one of the trading ships, the merchant ships. And he was gone for 2 or 3 years. And when he returned, none of his people were still alive. His entire civilization, his entire culture had been wiped out. He literally the last of the Mohicans. That movie really held a lot of truth to it. He was the last of his culture. He was the last man standing. And you can imagine the trauma that he experienced to come back and find that everything that he knew was gone. There was a third philosophy, and this was Freemasonry. And this was the glimmer of light in the shadow. This was the source of the statement and the Declaration of Independence upon which our country was founded. Even before there was a Constitution or a Bill of Rights, was the statement that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So there was this ethic, there was this light that existed, and was embedded in the Freemasons. The Freemasons are actually still active. I don't know, I'm not a Mason myself. I don't know, really whether they're holding to, that same ideal. I can't speak to that. But most of the monuments in Washington, D.C., it's like a Dan Brown movie, are truly erected and embedded with Masonic symbols and according to sacred Masonic geometry. There was a lot of magic and mysticism that was built into this nation's capital at the time of its birth. And the same ideals were also built into, or were also part of our culture. And it really is the root of many of what I believe to be the true American dream that has existed, though not flourished, ever since. It was based on the concept of gnosis, that the knowledge of transcendence arrived by way of interior intuitive means. We did not have to unequivocally surrender to some god, to some male sky god, or some one of his agents. That within us we all held that source of true divinity, and that we could arrive at our own radiant abundance, radiant being, if you would, by going inside, not by looking outside, towards something that would provide that transcendent experience. It was a direct personal experience of God. We didn't need a priest or a pastor or a rabbi to tell us, or to connect us with God. That we each have that ability to go within inside of ourselves and find that source. And itself in the medium myth, much of the mythology, and within it contains those archetypes. Those archetypes that are themselves hold an entire encyclopedia of the nature of human existence and human experience, and hold those stories. There's much more to our ancient history, and again, it's out of scope for this talk. But even going back 6,000 years, we don't really, in my opinion, get to the roots of where this all began or who we are. We only know what we've been told over the past, literally, a couple of 100 years. The victors always rewrite history, and perhaps the history that we have been given is just, again, a personal interpretation. It's a subjective reality that's their truth. It's not the whole truth. It's not the ultimate truth. And as I said, the Masons built many of the important national buildings and monuments, and they incorporated in them traditional occult and astrological symbolism. So, astrology was alive and well at in the early days of this country, and its rebirth now, which is so phenomenal and exciting to all of us here, certainly, really can trace its roots back to those early days. It used to be that astrology was, like math or science, or mathematics. It wasn't considered to be something that was, voodoo, or it wasn't the Rick Tornes said, the golden rule of superstition. But, again, in the shadow, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington were all Freemasons. However, most of them were slave owners. Slavery was part of our culture. This country was born on the backs of Negro slaves who, in a triangular trade, were brought here from Africa. It's not a good part of our history. And it's a sad fact that in 1776, there were 500,000 Negro slaves in America. It was 1/5 of the population. Excuse me. So as I said, I use the Gemini rising chart. I certainly, I'm not going to argue that this is the only way to look at it. I believe that astrology works, so all astrology works. There are many ways to come at it. There are charts that are erected. Obviously, the Sibley chart is a different time. There are some astrologers who use the adoption of the United States Constitution, but actually, there's some who use the chart for when it was actually ratified months later. So there are a number of different charts, and I don't think it's necessary to argue which one is correct. I work with this one. I understand a lot of my country's history from this chart. And I want to point out that, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams were, Benjamin Franklin especially, were interested in astrology. They knew what was happening, celestially. And it does not surprise me that they would have chosen to sign the Declaration of Independence with Uranus on the horizon, with Uranus rising. I think that was a deliberate choice because it truly reflects this country's nature and the way that we are instinctively express ourselves in the world. But we'll come to that as this progresses. So we'll start with Pluto, obviously, because that's the EA methodology. And here we're looking at Pluto and Capricorn in the 9th house. These were deep beliefs backed by power and authority. The original settlers traveled great distances, Sagittarius, 9th house, to find the truth, to find freedom, to find, a place where they could, be free and live, according to their own ideas and beliefs without any restraint or impairment. I think that's a very deep Sagittarian 9th house, certainly Capricorn placement. The importance of the country's role in the world, again, as a world leader, a sense of a national identity, in that regard. And we'll also see that restated when we look at the lunar nodes. And the foundation of the spiritual beliefs upon which were so important to this country that I delineated in the previous slides. The ideas of Puritanism, or the conquistadors and the Spanish explorers brought Christianity to the western part of the United States, and also the Freemasonry, which came from England. All of that is, I believe, totally represented by this Pluto placement. And it's also, unfortunately, evangelism and the need to convince others of these beliefs. I hope I'm not going to be guilty of that here today. But certainly, we all recognize that within that Sagittarian archetype is the belief that our truth is the only truth, and to try and convince others of that fact. And to, again, it's a subjective truth, it's a personal truth, but it's not the truth, not the whole truth. And it often incorporating religious indoctrination in domestic and foreign policy. The idea of censorship of films and just gender inequality for many years. There's a lot of religious indoctrination that's part of the way that the laws of this country have been laid down, and part of the foundation of our culture and the way that things have worked, and the decisions that were made. Again, there's an ancestral history of religious conditioning they brought with them. And it's interesting to note that the settlers, the original pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, came to escape persecution, but as soon as they got here, they began to persecute everybody who didn't believe as they did. They actually brought that same phenomenon with them. They didn't leave it behind. They were so conditioned by the culture they came from that they just repeated it. And unfortunately, it's a capability of ruthlessness. Pluto, brutality and exploitation of in the dissemination of those beliefs. That if somebody gets in your way, you just roll them over. Roll over them. And it's also an obsession with the land and natural resources. Our country is very much about the resources and the land. Landowners themselves immediately became the elite. The plantations of the original 13 colonies, and even as we expanded, across the breadth of our country, through the decades, it was still the land and its natural resources which were important, and really became the basis of the material abundance that was pursued as part of that American dream. And it's a compulsion of power. Certainly there, we have seen many examples, and even most, most recently, that power is being wielded without any, consequence of, any thought of the consequences of it, or, the trauma that would be inflicted by it. That power itself was, what they say, power corrupts, and power corrupts ultimately. I think I've misquoted that, but I think that you're all familiar with that saying. And it's also the efforts to control the media. Again, it's the need to control the dissemination of ideas, so that the belief system itself can be protected and become entrenched, so that there's a crystallization that would occur in terms of those beliefs in the structures and procedures and laws of the country, laws of the land. So the lunar nodes, the south node is in Aquarius, 9th house, and the north node is in Leo, 3rd house. And we can see in this south node is the root, the roots of the need for freedom and independence. This, this Aquarian nature to be liberated. It's what our country was founded upon, was, liberty and the sense of being liberated. It's also important to note that these nodes are stationary. When any planet is stationary, it's equivalent to taking a magnifying glass and holding it up to the sun, and the focus of that sunlight on anything will just burn in without any resistance. It's just becomes a very volatile, fiery force. So when with these nodes stationary, this need for liberty, for freedom and independence is quite intense. It's burning in. It was burning in the hearts of those who came here and it's burning in the hearts and souls of many people who are still here living in this country. It has never gone away. It's just part of our nature. We want to be free. We want to be independent, and we want our individuality as well. Individuality is very important to us. And we'll come back to that later in this conversation, because that individuality itself has reached monumental, radical expression. It represents our strong leadership in the world. The North Node in Leo. We've taken our place as a world leader since World War II. You know, it's questionable whether that is persisting. You know, with the emergence of the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, Iran, and China. You know, are we really the world leader? I think that that polarity has come more into balance. I don't think that the Western world is now the most potent force, you know, either spiritually, economically, or physically. Our position has certainly been challenged, but this has been our role. This has been our you know, our self-image, if you would. And it's the way that we've expressed ourselves. It's been our voice, you know, third house, that you know, basically you know, it's about our country, you know, taking the lead. And you'll see, we talk about Mars, you know, being the protector of the world. And, you know, this Aquarian energy is also a sense of self-importance and specialness. You know, there's something about people who have a lot of Uranian energy that they feel special. And Leos especially feel special. This whole polarity is again about, you know, a really enhanced ego. Leo is our, you know, a personal ego. And Aquarius is how that we project that ego out into community, becomes our collective ego, if you would, or our ego within community. And so there is this sense of self-importance and specialness that's really exerted here. And again, it's based on our ideas and our beliefs. It's this third house, ninth house axis, where we believe that, you know, what we believe is, you know, that's it, that's the truth. And we're going to express it in the world, and we're going to enforce it. We're going to enforce it at home, and we're going to do our best to, you know, save the world for democracy. I would turn that around and, you know, say that maybe we should be saving the world from our democracy. And there's an emotional detachment. There's a ruthlessness that's born out of this, you know, instinct, if you would, to just express who we are, and, you know, be so over the top, egoically, in terms of who we see that we are and how we need to project that in the world. It's the projection of our national truth on the rest of the world. You know, our truth is the truth, and your truth is, you know, really not. So you need to listen to us or else. And the need to control the environment. We've worked very hard to, you know, this, you know, Uranus is technology, and we have developed all kinds of technology to control nature. And what's really, you know, beginning to happen is that nature is rebelling against our attempt to control it. You know, we're controlling the air, we're controlling the production of food, we're controlling, you know, all the natural resources of the world through science, but yet we have not really improved it. We have only somehow genetically modified it so that it's more profitable. Geographically, we have, you know, clearly, you know, tried to take control of, you know, either economically or physically different different regions of the world. Ecologically, we've, you know, again, tried to control the ecology, trying to, you know, make it work in terms of being more productive to produce more money for those who are going to benefit from it. And certainly politically, to be able to control, you know, our environment and the world around us, our local environment and our environment at a distance, political. You know, it's very interesting that, you know, we're dealing with this situation where supposedly the Russians have come in and hacked, you know, the electoral process. And, you know, it's very interesting because the CIA is known to have manipulated many elections in Central and South America. and who knows what else. So, this is what it looks like to be on the receiving end, not on the giving end. To have another country come in and, mess around with our stuff rather than, we see what it's like when we go into another country and starting to mess with their stuff. What goes around comes around. And it represents the patriarchal Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is our patriarchal figure. He's our Zeus, not our Athena, clearly. He's our Zeus. He's our sky god, if you would. A patriarchal personification of our country. And also it's this sense that, the government is here to save us and fix us. And I think that this is another whole dimension of American mentality, where we believe that we live in a fix me world, that we can eat whatever we want and we can go to the doctor when our cholesterol gets too high and get a pill for it. That we can quote sin, or we can cross the line ethically, spiritually, and go and receive some kind of absolution. Well, we don't take responsibility for ourselves, and clearly the issues that we're seeing environmentally and politically are a result of that, where we have delegated the responsibility to somebody else. And I would suggest that anyone who, certainly in the Democratic Party or in either party, who failed to vote in the last election, can blame themselves for the outcome, because voter turnout in our country is at an extremely low, percentage. And I know that there are many people in the Democratic Party. I am a registered Democrat for what that's worth. But I was not happy again with the choice of the candidate that I had. And I considered, okay, I'm not going to vote. But I realized that not voting for who was the choice that I was given was a vote for the opposition. And I think that, part of the lesson that we're learning collectively is that we didn't take responsibility, that we left it to somebody else to decide. And now we're having to deal with the consequences of it after the fact. And unfortunately, it's too late. It's the morning after. There's not much that we can do except, gather, ourselves together, pick ourselves up and, dust ourselves off and meet the next time we have a choice, make a different, better choice, to recognize that we didn't make the right choice, because but we've been conditioned to do that. We've been conditioned to just, know that somebody can fix us somehow. And these are ideas and beliefs that are self-serving. I think that I've kind of covered this pretty well. Basically, we're holding on to what's familiar because it's safe. Because we even though perhaps we know that it doesn't work for us, we don't want to choose something different. It's our human nature. Then to go out and make a different choice, where maybe the downside of it is so unknown that it's scarier than what we have already that we're dealing with.
Daniel.
Yes.
We'll need to stop now for 15-minute break, and
Okay.
we start part 2 then. Okie dokie?
Yes, I don't think I'm even halfway through because I'm going so slow. So I'll probably have to speed up the second part, or maybe continue this, at another time. But I'm just keep going.
Okay, so we'll be back in 15. See you then.
Okay. So to pick up the story, we just talked about Pluto and Capricorn 9th house, and the lunar nodes Aquarius and Leo 3rd house and 9th house. And we're up to the point of looking at the Cancer stellium, and in this chart, it's in the 2nd house, which really relates to our obsession, as I said, with natural resources, with the land and oil, gas, air, water, gold, silver, all that fun stuff. The Cancer stellium it really reflects how family-oriented we are. We're home and hearth. We're a deeply emotional and sentimental country, and we have a deep sense of national identity, nationalism. And it really is our manifest destiny. We had this belief in 17th and 18th century that everything from coast to coast should belong to us. And it really didn't matter who else was living there or what, how long they had been there. We just decided that it was ours. And the primary focus is on wealth and land and resources. We are a very materialistic nation, in spite of the spiritual philosophies and intentions that were really brought with the original settlers. There's a profound sense of self-worth, as I said, bordering on self-aggrandizement. It's a restatement of that Aquarian lunar south node. And there's a spontaneity, and there's a sincere, buoyant optimism. We're a very optimistic country. We believe that, let the good times roll. We believe that there's, a lot of good things in the future. And, sometimes I think that optimism masks, some of the realities. But it is, it is a healthy nature. I'm not going to, say that it's not, but again, there's two sides to every coin. And we hold the belief that each generation will surpass the past, but unfortunately that has not been the case. At least it's not the case now. We're actually first generation, of Americans whose potential and our children will not surpass their parents and grandparents. There's an arrogance, there's an inflated sense of self-esteem. Jupiter conjunct Saturn, conjunct Sun. In Cancer is the moon, it's our ego, it's our self-image. So again, there is this exaggerated sense of who we are and our own sense of self-worth. And it's a sense of entitlement. Again, we believe that it all should, that the world owes us, that somehow the planet owes us. And these are issues surrounding gender, racial, and social equality, just in terms of where our values and priorities are. Cancer and Capricorn is, about gender assignment. It's mom and dad and male and female. And, Venus is the balance, of the equality of our resources and our priorities and where our real meaning is. So the Sun in Cancer squares the Libra Saturn in the 5th house, and this is the paradox in the American character. It's social justice and equal opportunity, regardless of station in life, versus untrammeled ambition to amass personal wealth. And no one is above the law versus the freedom to pursue the acquisition of wealth without any social responsibility. And it's personal wealth and control of resources versus the sharing and the balanced distribution of resources. And it's the haves versus the have-nots. I alluded to, Uranus rising in the chart. It's our fierce independence and our rugged individualism. It's the pioneer spirit that literally, led people from, Ohio to, migrate out to California. And to, whether it was the gold rush or just, the promise of, having their own land, having their own place to farm, or, to provide a life, a better life for their children. They would just set out on their own, that total instinct, that Martian instinct, to just, to move, and the diversity of the way that instinct expresses itself, Gemini. And it's a fascination with new technologies, Uranus. Because Uranus is technology. We are a very technological country, and we are so it's evolved to the point where there's actually a digital addiction that we're all experiencing. It's the intellectual projection of our national ideology outside our borders. Again, we talked about this. It's the belief that our way is the right way, and it's our way or the highway. And it's also national trauma. We've had Lincoln was assassinated, Kennedy was assassinated, McKinley was assassinated. They tried to shoot Ronald Reagan. We had the Great Depression. We had the economic collapse of 29. We've had a lot of personal tragedies, and most of them, or many of them, actually in the last 40 or 50 years. With John Kennedy, his brother Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King. Well, we have trauma as part of our history and as part of our experience. But, trauma is not designed, to bring us down or to make us feel bad about ourselves or to feel less. It facilitates change. Trauma is, Jason Holly says that calls trauma the interrupter. It interrupts our normal behavior patterns so that we can go in a different direction, make some different choices. The Uranus transits to Gemini have all been major wars. Uranus was in Gemini at the time of the American Revolution, the Civil War, and World War II. But each of those transits resulted in total transformation of the nation. In that first transit in the late 1700s, we became a sovereign entity, a sovereign country. And the Civil War actually, kind of united two economies, two cultures, though I would suggest that maybe those two cultures have never been completely united. And the end of World War II, it brought America to the world stage as a world leader. It's individuality as elitism. We do have an elitist attitude. Our need for it to be individual, to be unique, to be independent, in its shadow becomes an elitist attitude. And I would suggest again that there has always been a 1%. It's not something that's new. That just because we've realized it and we're calling them the 1%ers, it's always been that way. Moon's in Aquarius, 10th house. So, here we have our self-image in Uranus' sign. It's a restatement of all of those Uranian first house, on the ascendant, on the angle, influences and expressions. We see ourselves as a rugged individualist. This is the source of, the patriotic motto during the War of Independence, "Don't tread on me." It's our staunch independence versus giving up self-responsibility. We trust that Uncle Sam will somehow take care of us. And I talked about that. We live in a fix-me culture. We feel that we can, step over all the bounds, health-wise, politically, socially, spiritually, and that somehow, we'll be saved. Well, if you remember this statement that came out of Orobai, out of the Hopi Pueblo, several years ago, no one's coming to save us. We are the ones we've been waiting for. It's our ancestral heritage becomes the foundation of national institutions, morals, and ethics. Again, this deep spiritual, religious context, whether it was Puritanism, whether it was Roman Catholicism, or whether it was Freemasonry, are woven through all the institutions and morals and ethics and the legal structure and jurisprudence of our country. And this has become the law of the land. This is the way that we see ourselves. And it's the cycles of the national emotional trauma. The moon is all about the cycles of animation and withdrawal. And we certainly, as a country, have ridden that roller coaster more than once. And it makes us aggressive, sometimes military, in a military way. Again, we believe that our way is the right way. And we're ready to express that. 10th house is authority. And we have never, failed to, to stand in that authority. We've never, the word is failing me, we've never, I'll come back to it. It's okay. It's holding on to solidified self-serving patterns of behavior. Again, the moon is our familiarity. It's human nature to hold on to what we know, to what's familiar, what we're comfortable with. It's our comfort level. But evolution is not a theory, it's a fact. And certainly in the sign of Aquarius, which is Uranus, which is that liberating energy, that deconditioning evolutionary force that works, the transpersonal need to move past where we have been, is going to shatter any of those crystallized, solidified patterns of behavior that we're holding on to. And it's creating a future sometimes as an extension of the past. Unfortunately, we're hearing the phrase, "Make America Great Again." I don't think that's happening. And, I don't know, yes, America was great. I love my country. I think that we have, held an important place in the world. But were we great? subject to debate. So Mars in the first house, again, reiterates that rugged individualism. It's that instinct, to just, go out and explore and pioneer. And it's squaring Neptune in Virgo. So this is our militarism. This is taking on the role as the world's police force. Now Mars has, more than one expression. We think of Mars, basically as, as bloodlust, but that's really the Greek Eris expression of Mars, where, war was a way of life, but the Romans saw Mars as the protector and guardian. And we have certainly expressed both of those faces of Mars, in the 250 years that we have been, sovereign. But we take on the role. We believe that we must make the world safe for democracy, and that somehow we are the world's police force. And I think that is true more than ever today. And again, it's, with the square to Neptune, is this, idea that somehow God is on our side, that our God is the right God, is the only God. And that's an illusion. Neptune is full of illusions and, beliefs that are not necessarily true. It's the instinctual desire for freedom and independence, clearly. And it's unfortunately, it's a mistrust of foreigners. It's the xenophobic attitude that we have. Every ethnicity, every group that has migrated to our shores has wanted to close the door behind them, clearly. It's a religious, almost mystical roots, and it's oversimplified or superficial, this idea of manifest destiny. It's a famous painting, and I probably should have included it here, with this idea of this, Venusian, beautiful goddess, just leading the settlers west. Almost this mystical belief that somehow this whole land from the Atlantic to the Pacific should belong to us. And it was our vision. And it was what we thought was, our reality, but it was really just really a selfish agenda. And there's a conflict here between action and belief. We believe in the pursuit of happiness and the equality and freedom for all, but have we really acted on that? This is a crisis in consciousness right here. Is this real? Have we really acted according to those principles? So this chart these are our secondary progressions. So we have a progressed moon in Sagittarius. There's a T-square here opposite Uranus, square in Chiron. This was reflected really clearly in the Women's March that occurred. It was such an enormous, exuberant, instinctive expression that just erupted from the very grassroots of our country. People turned out. Here in Santa Fe, we have only a population of less than 250,000 people, and 15,000 people turned out, downtown for that event. I have been to a number of protests and events that over the past few years, but I've never seen anything like it. It was a sea of people. It was just the most soulful, emotional gathering that I can ever remember. And it it deals with our wounds, and it deals with this need to really liberate ourselves from what's happening, and to find our truth, and to find the true instincts and the true belief and liberation that we've come to find. It's also Black Lives Matter. Chiron, in our country's chart in Aries in the 11th house, in my opinion, relates to the way that all the non-whites have been treated. They're less than, and they all carry this wound, and our country carries this wound of slavery, and of the way that we have, the elitist attitude that we felt that white and rich is better than black and poor somehow. And the emergence of Black Lives Matter is crucial to this T-square, and it really is generating the seventh house is where things show up. Carl Jung said that whatever we repress in our shadow shows up as circumstances in our outer world, and we call it fate. Well, Black Lives Matter is that kind of circumstance. It is the subconscious expression of what our culture has created, because we have repressed the truth. It has been swept under the rug. We consider it to be regional. If we lived in the West or we lived in the Northeast, we said, oh, there's no racism, but there was deep racism. I grew up in the Northeast, and racism was certainly part of my upbringing. I was exposed to it. It was not something that existed just in the South. And when I lived in the South later in life, and I drove through Alabama and Georgia, and I saw, the shanties that are still there where the slaves lived, and how the blacks were treated. It was shocking, and it was heartbreaking. And it was an experience. I think every American needs to see it and understand it, because it is part of who we are and can't be denied. But this is also, eliciting public revelations. There are new truths that are emerging. Moon in Sagittarius progressed. These are new truths. These are a new self-image, a new understanding of who we are, and new outer circumstances as a result, that will show up. And it's the collective emotional shocks that we're experiencing. I read not too long ago on Facebook, somebody, very wisely said, we shouldn't be building a wall, we should be building a mirror. We really need to look back and see who we are, rather than just keeping other people out. And these emotional shocks are the result. I think that this relates directly to the Flint, Michigan water crisis. Again, it was Black people. There was a community in New Jersey where I grew up, and it was a Black community, and it was a really nice neighborhood. And that was pretty unusual in the late 50s and early 60s. Black people were, there was a lot of segregation that was unspoken. Realtors would not sell. In many communities, they were restricted communities, and they would not sell to Black families. And here was this one neighborhood in a wealthy white community, part of a wealthy white community, in really nice homes, and it was all Black people. About 30 years later, it was discovered that it was built on a toxic waste dump. It's just so typical. It just, when I heard that, I wanted to cry. I was just so ashamed of literally what had happened in my own community or nearby. And the Flint, Michigan water crisis is the same thing. It's because they're not white and they're not rich and they don't live next door to us. We don't really care about what happens to them, and the abuses that we have perpetrated on others as a result. Our progressed sun is in Pisces, and it's trining our natal sun. And to me, this reflects a confusion and disorientation that's opening the space for a clearer vision to occur. We like to think that trines are, happy and facilitating, and they're all good. Well, first of all, trines don't work unless we're proactive with them. They're not like squares. Squares compel us. Oppositions compel us to act. Trines don't. Trines can pass unnoticed if we don't engage with them. But in this case, I think that it is generating, again, circumstances and things that are happening that are making it impossible for us to be asleep. It's an awakening energy. They're emotional confrontations that we're seeing. Moon, Sun in Cancer, and Sun in Pisces. It's a very emotional energy, very deep energy, and we're confused and we're disoriented right now. But I think confusion is good, because when you name something or when you know something, then any further understanding of it ceases at that point, because it's a done deal. It. And when we're confused, in that confusion, we must search for an answer. We must re-examine and begin to look at things with a different perspective, from a different, more objectivity, to understand what it's about. And out of that confusion, we can find, something new to understand. And there are those who say that there has been an obfuscation and subversion, deception surrounding the President of the United States. I look back a little bit, and when the progress sun moved through Capricorn and Aquarius, it started in the late 60s, and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were both shot. John Kennedy was shot. Richard Nixon became president, and who would have thought after the Nixon-Kennedy debates that he could ever have been president? Ronald Reagan was elected. We had there are those who say, and I think I've referenced this in a later slide, that there was a cloud created over the presidency. And, I don't want to get into the conspiracy theory stuff, but it's pretty obvious that, that something has happened, and now we've ended up with Donald Trump. So, there's a clearly a sequential development of things here that need to be explored, and things that have been swept under the rug, and revelations, what really has happened through these years that nobody has really, we've delved into it, but have we really heard the truth? And with the sun progressed in Pisces, it's very possible that the truth, that the ultimate meaning of some of these events will finally emerge. I'm hoping that that's the case. And it's also the Russian hacking, where there has been this, behind the scenes, that things have been going on with our electoral process, very Neptunian. It's all hidden. And I think this is also the Dakota pipeline. This really refers to, and so does the progressed moon in Aquarius, where our natural resources, second house, are being messed with. That there's a hidden agenda, and it's this 10th house patriarchal, authoritarian, energy that is determining, what's going to happen with these resources. It really doesn't have anything to do with what's right or wrong, or what really is ethically, spiritually legal and not legal. Progressed Mercury is in Aquarius. So again, here's a reinstatement of all that Aquarian energy. And Mercury is our press. It is also stationed direct. It's actually just stationed by progression. It's trining Mars, it's conjunct the moon, and I apologize, there's no circle on the moon to highlight it. So this energy, again, is very, very strong. As I said, when a planet stations direct, it's drilling down, it's really burning in that energy in that point, and really emphasizing and amplifying what's going on. Women's voices are increasingly being heard with this conjunction to the moon, Mercury being our voice, our communication. And again, there are shocks, to the office of the presidency. Most importantly, to me, this reflects the media consolidation. I don't know if most people realize it, but over the past 20 or 30 years, the dissemination of news in our country has been distilled down to 6 organizations that control all the information that we receive, unless we are directing ourselves proactively towards alternative news sources. Well, when we turn on the TV, we're getting a message that is been coordinated. It's all in concert, and there's an active agenda here that's not necessarily to our best interest. And this is this trine to this Martian first house. It's the fake news, personally. That's how I see it. Progress Venus in Aries, squaring Pluto. This is an emergence of new community. The 11th house is that community. It's based on egalitarian principles. Venus is where we find meaning. It's not necessarily ultimate meaning, but it's what's important to us, and it's what determines our priorities, and we pass it off to Mars. It's how we're acting. It becomes our behavior. It's what's important to us. But our national priorities are being manipulated for self-interest. It's Aries. There isn't really this egalitarian thing going on. It's Uranus and 11th house and Aquarius are an interesting archetype because it definitely reflects the need to change. But in some cases, it's the desire to change things back to the way that they were, not necessarily to move forward. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing a great divide in terms of how people are perceiving how the changes should be implemented. Everybody wants change. Almost anybody you would poll would say, yes, things aren't working. You ask them individually about their own lives or about our country. but there is a wide gulf. There's a gap between how, and it really is a polarity. It's just two different directions. Do we go forward or do we go backward? And this is the social trauma that we're experiencing right here. It's a crisis of meaning, a crisis of priorities, a crisis of values, and it's a crisis in action. And, are we really acting on those basic principles that our country was supposedly founded on, and the intentions of the people who came here to find life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I think this is also same-sex marriage. Venus definitely is that feminine archetype, and here, conjunct Chiron in Aries, I think that it is a response to that patriarchal Capricornian Pluto that has held the sway of power, for the entire length of the United States history. Progressed Mars in Libra. It's trining the moon. I apologize that my text is covering it. This is the public outrage that we're perceiving here. Again, this trine to Mars isn't necessarily something that's facilitating any resolution immediately. I think that it is in the long run, because again, it's awakening our sense of who we are. The moon in Aquarius, it's liberating ourselves from the 10th house conditioned self-image that we have of who we are, and who we're becoming. And with Mars transiting the country's 5th house here, conjunct Saturn, which we'll see in the next chart. Hopefully I have time to get through all this. We're really seeing that this resentment is erupting, and the feminist militancy that's emerging, again, the Women's March, and just how the role of women in our culture is changing. And it is our militarization at home and abroad, and it is this increased gun violence. Just in the last day, there were 3 horrible shootings here. I mean, it's not abating, it's not receding, it just seems to be getting worse. And the increased police violence, where, in community after community, the police are really, overstepping, what we consider to be legitimate exercise of power. And it's the militarization of America, from my perspective, because most of the law enforcement are the guys who have come back from, Afghanistan or overseas, and they've been trained to kill. They've been trained to be violent, and then they're just inserted back into our society. And where did they fit? They fit in law enforcement, and they're just doing what they were been taught to do. It's really a vicious cycle. So the transits that we're looking at, we have Jupiter transiting our 5th house, trining the moon, squaring the sun, and again conjuncting Saturn. This is a radical individuation, self-actualizing process. What's happening is that the individuation of people, to a great degree, has become radicalized. It's this Uranus and Aries energy that we're experiencing, and it, with our Uranus, on an angle natally, and Uranus in Aries, and we'll get to that a little bit when I come to that transit. We're just seeing this radical selfishness that's just rampant everywhere, and it's most obvious right now in Congress and in the White House. Saturn is in Sag retrograde, and it's in conjunct Mercury, and it's opposite Mars, squaring Neptune and trining Chiron. And again, what I characterize this as our military authority that's driven by the pseudo-patriotic vision. We're expressing ourselves in the world as as the authority, and we're just taking this military stance, and we're just projecting it out into all of our relationships with others, and it's just exposing our wounds, and it's there's the message that we're putting out both internally, the narratives we're telling ourselves, the narratives we're hearing, the narratives we're telling the rest of the world. It just doesn't jive with who we intend to be. There's a lot of again, confusion and hidden agendas, and this Neptunian energy that what we're seeing is not really real. that it's all clouded, it's masked, that there's something going on beneath the surface that really has just really not completely emerged. Interestingly enough, Uranus is squaring Pluto, and as the transit, excuse me, this is I'm sorry, I've got a mistake here in this image. Um, as Uranus squares this Pluto, our natal Pluto, not the transiting Pluto, it's picking up the energy that we've been experiencing for the past 5 years. It's almost like a handoff. We've had this radical transformation of the world as we know it, and around the world, across the globe, and now it's being handed off on a more personal, if you would, within our own country. That as this outer square separates, this square is perfecting internally to our own Pluto. So it's just just carrying that same energy right down to our own ground zero. And Neptune is in Pisces, and it's it's transiting that fifth house, dissolving that authoritarian patriarchal attitude that we have, and an image that we have of ourselves and our way we project ourselves in the world. And I think to a great degree, this again, this reflects, I call it a cloud over the president of the United States. I mean, why have things come to the situation that they have? How did this happen? We have to look back literally over the last 40 years and see what the progression, no pun intended, has looked like. The events that have occurred, to really understand and see from a much wider perspective the changes that are occurring within our country. Pluto in Capricorn is squaring Saturn, trine Neptune, and squaring Chiron. Again, we have a T-square here with Saturn, Chiron, and Pluto. We have a trine to Neptune. There's tremendous pressure here to move past these old patterns of wounding, to find a different truth, and to seek a truth that really will begin to relieve some of this wounded pattern that we keep inflicting on ourselves and others. This is a tri-wheel, and I'm going to kind of run through. Linda, how much time do we have left?
20 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to kind of move through this quickly because this just really restates a lot of the things that I've said. We have a leadership that's driven by powerful religious belief. Here, we have Jupiter conjunct Mars, progress Mars conjunct natal Saturn. We're just going through this time where there's an exposure of our militancy, of the authority and patriarchy that has held us in place, and this need to find balance, Libra, and to find new truth about how we have really acted instinctively in this patriarchal way, and how the leadership of our country is just driven by religious and their own ethical standards, which really are not communal at all. It's really the agenda of a really narrow slice of our population, and it's the search to find a new truth, a new national purpose. Saturn in Sag retrograde is trining the progressed Venus, and again, this is finding a new truth, a national meaning. Venus is where we find meaning. It's where our values and priorities come from. And with Saturn trining it, we're being forced to, in Sagittarius, we're being forced, compelled, if you would. Circumstances are showing up in the seventh house, placement that are compelling us to really look for the truth of what's been going on, and just to begin to make some different choices, because it also is coincidental with the Saturn trining Uranus that we're experiencing, which is the third, the second trine of this whole Saturn Uranus cycle, which I've written about. I actually have a YouTube video about it. You can see the whole history that's there. Uranus in Aries. which I spoke about. This is that radical selfishness. And, you know, if you're not sure, just get out on the highway or get out on the roadway. And it's just amazing with the attitudes of people and how they are just so self-centered and so, you know, self-absorbed and only interested, it seems, in their own, and what it is that they need and what's in front of them. It's a radical disruption of our fundamental structure of society as well. This is a hard placement. This is actually an exact semi-square, and there's a zero tolerance here in terms of how our individuality and our sense of compassion and forgiveness are just, you know, not jiving. There's a clash. It's a radical disruption. And Neptune is conjunct our progress moon. This is where some of the good news begins to emerge. And there is a lot of good news here. It's not all bad news because, as I said, these traumas are meant to facilitate a new awareness, a new understanding. They're meant to interrupt these habitual behavior patterns that have really persisted for 250 years. You know, we're so deeply entrenched in what we think and believe and how we act. And what we're experiencing now is a wake up. This is what we need, unfortunately, to really begin to see that it doesn't work and that we need to find a new patterns of behavior. So from this chaos, a transcendent vision begins to emerge. We can begin to formulate something new, and that's exactly what's happening. You know, I think that Bernie Sanders was a perfect example of it. That, you know, he pulled together, you know, a whole, you know, group of people who finally felt that there was somebody out there who held their vision and who held, you know, their dreams of the future for themselves and their families. And Pluto and Capricorn is squaring progress Mars. So, you know, again, we're seeing that there's a need to change this militancy. It's need to change these patriarchal laws and these ethical judgments which we have legally, you know, standardized and crystallized in our culture. It certainly coincides with Jupiter's transit, and, you know, this is all working together. It's just a reinstatement of just about everything that I have said. We all know that we have a solar eclipse coming up in August. I just want to address it briefly because it is a total eclipse, and it is an event that is going to have some impact on our culture, on our nation. We've got Mars opposite Saturn, so there's going to again be this recognition that there is an illumination, if you would, between this free spirit and this independent attitude and versus, you know, this instinctive, compulsive way of just being totally, you know, egoic and, you know, just out for ourselves. And, you know, it's a blend. You know, it's conjunct the lunar nodes. It's also in the same sign as our as the U.S. Nodal axis, lunar nodal axis, and so it's going to expose this polarity between self and others, and between self and community, and how we really need to come together as community and stop behaving, you know, we're just out for ourselves, which has really been the basis of you know, a lot of the behavior and what our history has been. Jupiter in Libra is going to oppose Chiron, so, you know, we're going to see this T-square again with you know, a different voice being heard, a different voice being expressed, seeking balance, seeking to, you know, talk about these wounds and you know, these racial inequalities that are inherent in this Chiron and Aries 11th house, and, you know, the trine to the Moon and Saturn, and Mars, you know, is again going to open up the possibilities that we're going to begin to see ourselves differently, that we're going to be able to see what's real, what has really been happening, and be able to see that this militancy that we've held on to really doesn't work, that we need to heal it, that we need to bring We need to bring something more balanced and a different truth to this expression. And, Saturn, again, we have another T-square here from the eclipse to Mars and Neptune. So again, here is that, instinctive, nature to just be self-serving and express who we are, our own impulses, our own needs, versus, this idea that, we are one world, we are one country, that, somehow there's only one of us on the planet. To recognize, this Virgo energy that escape this cycle of sadomasochism and to begin to heal ourselves, to begin to recognize what we need to work on, nationally, collectively, and personally. And again, I tend to think that with the Saturn 7th house, that we're going to see circumstances that are going to expose all of these energies, and begin to heal and illuminate to some degree the inequalities and woundings that we have perpetrated on others and on some of our citizens. And Uranus, yeah, again, there's another T-square here from Pluto and Uranus to Mercury, and Pluto will also still be opposing our Sun. Pluto has been transiting the U.S. Sun for quite some time, for a number of years. And so again, we're going to have these tensions, these crises are going to emerge, Pluto, where we're going to, new voices are going to emerge. We're going to have these emotional experiences. This Cancer, there's going to be outcries. There's going to be emotional response, verbally and, by word and by written, accounts. And we're going to have, just different messages that are going to be coming to us, to help us, kind of liberate from what's been going on, as a result of the traumas that we have been experiencing. And Neptune squaring Uranus again, with, our vision and our independence, coming into coherence. And certainly coherence is a key word for the Sun. The Sun holds all the entire solar system together. So it's finding a new coherence, an emotional coherence, a new way of a new vision for our society, and a new priorities, new resources, new ways of surviving, different type of survival. And grand square from Pluto. Again, it's all the things we talked about. It's our wounding. It's our purpose, our sole purpose as a nation. It's our national or legal structure, our jurisprudence. I believe that this reflects this single square, grand square, to me reflects that this country is going through its greatest test of American jurisprudence in 250 years, and it is my hope and my vision that the courts, the Supreme Court, and that the rule of law in this country will prevail ultimately. But it's an uphill struggle. So we have some inconvenient truths. In the effort to be more secure by degree, we have lost the sacred freedoms that we took for granted. Militarization, xenophobia, misogyny, and greed have created an American dystopia. We've witnessed the disintegration of ideas and beliefs that were the foundation of society, and we are engaged in a psychological war between those wanting to maintain the status quo and those who want a more equitable distribution of wealth and resources. The educational opportunities have deteriorated, including the fundamental safety of our public schools. And we're living in a toxic sea. All of our natural resources, our air, our food, our water, are all under attack. We're a plutocracy masquerading as a republic. We are controlled and programmed by our media. And who is controlling the mass media is the question we all need to ask ourselves. And there's a revolving door between government and business. It's what they call fascism, where the business interests and the profit motive are really what's running our country, running the government. Social mobility, as I said, is lower than ever before. The generations, coming onto the world have less chance of finding more abundance and prosperity than their parents and grandparents. And the gulf between the haves and the have-nots is widening. Some feel that our fundamental systems are irreparably broken. But are the traumas that we are collectively experiencing really the catalyst for new consciousness? And this is the meaning that I hold on to. We're having these traumas because we're being woken up. Uranus is an awakener, and we're being awakened. We're being liberated from ourselves, whether we want to go there or not. And can we expect the dream of the Freemasons, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to emerge? And when that might happen, I say yes. We're a nation that traveled great distances to find religious and intellectual freedom. They all held a dream to be treated equally under the law and to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And each group that arrived became the religious, political, or economic authority of the places they occupied. They took ownership of all the natural resources they found without consideration of the impact of the indigenous people who had preceded them for centuries, even millennia, or the land itself. The idea of freedom and equality for all survived only as a dream. Over time, various groups have come together to institute the changes to the consensus reality that have become crystallized. And this has been an uphill fight whose battleground was on the fields of Gettysburg and the chambers of the Supreme Court. We are reaching a critical mass as the collective psyche is compelled to make different choices as visions clash, as Neptune opposes natal Neptune, forcing a new paradigm to emerge, Pluto conjunct Pluto, in the coming decade. Oh, my PowerPoint doesn't like that animation. Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. It's my favorite quote from Arundhati Roy, who I had the grace, I'm so grateful to have actually heard a couple of weeks ago here. She's an amazing speaker and an amazingly conscious, radiant person. That's her vision.
Daniel, we do have time. Sorry, we have another 15 minutes if you'd like that.
Well, no, I'm through it.
Okay.
I'll open the floor to, if anybody has any questions or comments or anything that they'd like to add or ask, anything that wasn't clear, or if they felt that I, delved into the shadow too deeply or did not express the dream of the future too loudly, now's your opportunity.
Daniel, I just really loved your presentation. Thank you so much. I'm in Australia and I don't know that much about USA history, but this was so educational. Thank you so much. Uranus is the awakener, and then you also mentioned that Neptune will oppose Neptune and Pluto will conjunct Pluto. That is pretty awesome, don't you think?
It's amazing. It's what we're headed into. It's what the next decade holds. And astrologically, I've looked back in time, and both of these events correlate to two of the most impactful but violent and transformational time in U.S. history, the American Revolution and the Civil War. So, this is what's facing us, but, we are conscious beings, and collectively we are also conscious. We have probable futures. I don't think that astrology is well served as a predictive science. I think that we make choices, and I truly believe that karma is the choices that we make, and nothing more, nothing less than that. And we all have a choice to make. We all can choose what our future will be. We're going to choose it collectively. And I think that is what's happening. And I think that the impact of the events that I've described and that we have all experienced personally and collectively are all leading us in that direction. I think that it is coalescing a whole new sense of community and a whole new possibility of who we can be. Eckhart Tolle, wrote about the new earth, and it's not theory. I believe it's fact. And I also believe that new earth is here already. And I would suggest that if anybody would like to experience it, the first thing that we need to do is to turn off your television and to begin to, go inside to find answers, use your intuition. We all have that incredible facility. Every one of us is intuitive. It's not something that some people are born with, and it's only that the ones who are using their intuition are the ones who've trusted it and developed it, and it's the only difference. we need to find that truth within us, in our hearts. You know, we have two really intelligent organs in our body. One is our brain and the other is our heart. And our brains are always going to analyze and most often paralyze ourselves. We're going to be driven by rational choices that, you know, I have to do this because such and such will happen if I don't. But when we listen to our heart never will steer us wrong. We always go in the direction that we need to go, because that is I believe, the direct connection to our soul. And it's but we don't really, you know, we don't get it until we experience it emotionally ourselves. So these mass traumas are accomplishing exactly that. This is the meaning in them, as I see it, that, you know, all the people who voted for our current president are realizing that, you know, they made a mistake, that, you know, they put their faith in the wrong man, that what they're hoping for is not only is it going to materialize, but they're going to end up off worse than you know, they started out. So we all need to experience it individually. You know, our neighbor can lose their job, or, you know, they can have death in the family, but it didn't happen to us. So, you know, we don't pay attention to it. It doesn't really mean, yes, we feel bad for them, but that's about as far as it goes. When it happens to us, it hits home. It means something. We change. We reach that point. Pluto pushes us to the limit of the choices that we make, so that it creates a choiceless awareness, so that we have to make a different choice. We can no longer go in the same direction. And that's what's happening to us in this country. And it's really what's happening to us across the entire globe. It's happening in Australia. It's happening in France. It's happening in North Korea. It's happening everywhere. We have to recognize that you know, this really, I have a friend who has a saying. She says, there's only one of us on the planet. And, you know, that may sound a little far-fetched, but I do believe it. We're all in this together. What happens to one of us happens, you know, affects all of us. And this is how we have to come at it. But we have to take responsibility. We have to be responsible for the choices that we make. We have to be responsible for our own health, for the food that we eat, for the water that we drink, for, you know, even the places that we go. It's up to us. Nobody's coming to save us. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
Excellent. Excellent, Daniel. So any other questions?
Great presentation, Daniel. Just absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Something I was thinking about as you were talking earlier about Uranus that I've never had heard addressed. You know, the myth where he stuffed his children back into Gaia, and I probably have that, you know, kind of messed up a little bit. But I'm seeing that, you know, with you've seen that played out so much with the, you know, the generations coming afterwards. The older generations are not wanting to face what's going on, and facing their choices are affecting, you know, the younger generations, and basically that's what they're doing. They're stuffing, you know, stuffing them back into Gaia. So.
Right. No, you're right. Yeah, it was actually into Tartarus, into the place of imprisonment. But you're absolutely right, because they were afraid that those younger generations were going to supersede them and change their way of life. So that is the pattern. It's out of fear. Because they feel threatened. Saturn actually ate all his children. So, you know, after he castrated his own father, he in turn ate his own children who rebelled against him. So it's a whole pattern of behavior that really, you're right, is still ongoing. It's archetypal of human nature.
Any further questions? Daniel, I've always wondered about the deep sense of nationalism that American people seem to portray. And just looking at the charts there, I think it was the South Node in Aquarius, ruled by Uranus in Gemini. So that really does make sense to me, Gemini being the sign of symbols and the flag, the USA flag. So, you know, like when we went to school here in Australia, we didn't really wave the flag around, you know what I mean? But I've noticed in America that was a really huge focus for you. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it also points to the Cancer stellium, because we see that you know, it's that familial, you know, family, country, you know, mother country, Uncle Sam. There's this sense that the country itself is our family, and you know, we're very loyal to our family. We you know, and again, there's certainly exceptions to that rule, but as a whole, you know, that you know, sense of our family attachment is genetic. You know, it's this genetic, you know, connection, bloodline that you know, is impervious. Yeah.
Excellent, Daniel. Sheila Jean, did you want to say something? Oh, hang on, I'll just go ahead.
I think that, you know, it's not so much astrology, but along the same vein that it's a recession when your neighbor lost their job, but it's a depression when you lose yours.
Yeah.
That perhaps something that Donald Trump as president is contributing is that it's getting bad enough that things will change more quickly, and that might help the planet.
That's it. That's it. He's actually escalating. He's escalating it. He's driving.
Yes,
He's driving us forward.
right.
But you know, it's like a perfect storm. You know, I don't know if you read Glenn Greenwald at all, but he has cautioned us. You know, he has said that, you know, the impeachment of Donald Trump, and I didn't really want to get into Trump today, but the impeachment of Donald Trump actually could make things worse, because with Pence as president, the GOP, he will rubber stamp everything that the GOP agenda wants passed. And right now, it's you know, there's kind of a standoff. So you know, we're between a rock and a hard place. There's no question. And I don't think there's any easy solution as to how things will turn out. I think we just have to trust in source. We just have to trust the universe, which I think, you know, has actually been the biggest learning lesson of my life, is to just trust, and to do the right thing, and hold the dream, hold a good intention. You know, try to change whatever negative thought patterns we might have, and just, you know, try and be conscious. And ultimately, it's all good. It's just, you know, the greatest crises that I experienced in my own life turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, though they didn't look like that at the time. And I hold that, you know, I just hold them. And I think that that's what we're moving through as you know, as a nation and as a planet. We're just moving through this cataclysm that really holds, you know, perhaps we're on the, you know, on the verge of a golden age, but golden ages don't come easily. So, you know, but only time will tell. Sheila's still muted here.
Go
Sheila,
ahead. Go
what
ahead,
was-
Sheila.
I also think that there is a deep state, and that, like any bureaucracy, it tends to feed itself first, and that it's hard to get rid of. And if he can rid us of the deep state running the war machine, I'll be grateful.
I'm
That's all
hoping
I want.
I'm hoping that all these Sagittarian and Jupiter transits, you know, there are things about John Kennedy's assassination, and certainly Robert and Martin Luther King, that many of, and even 9/11 especially, there's a lot of people who believe that we were not told the truth. Any one of those revelations would change everything, Shiraji. Any one of them. It certainly doesn't. It wouldn't take all of them. It would only take one, and it would be it, it would be as impactful as a UFO landing, you know, in front of the White House. because it would be, an unavoidable truth. And once that information comes out, and I believe that that is very possible what's up ahead, that these things are going to be revealed. We've got, Snowden and WikiLeaks, and, the Russians, say that they know some of these things and they have held back. So it could come out from one or more different directions. And when it does, it's going to change everything.
Okay, Daniel, thank you so much. That brings us to the end. So everybody, could you please thank Daniel Fiverson?
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Daniel.
you, Daniel.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you guys for, giving me your attention. I'm humbled. Thank you.
Bye.